Chapter 11. Finding out the truth. My old friend. Tomorrow night is good to meet. I will admit that it will be good to talk to you face to face. My other friend has not given me any information pertaining to my property, but from the tone and words of your letters, I don't think I'm going to like what I hear. My better half is concerned for the children's safety and will be accompanying me. We will meet at the scheduled time. Your old friend. Me. Salazar sighed with relief as he read Nicholas's letter. Then he looked at Hedwig. I have no reply for you to take. It's all taken care of, he said, as he scratched the top of her head. She hooted in reply, and began to eat a bit of Salazar's bacon. Why can't you find your own breakfast, you silly pigeon? Hedwig glared and hooted angrily at Nora, who was staring at a bowl full of mice that appeared to either be stunned or dead. She had already eaten one and was thinking about eating another, but she was still undecided. Over the last several weeks the house elves in the kitchen had been catching the mice and serving them in a bowl at Salazar's end of the table. Nora had been delighted by this new form of food, and had taken a liking to it. She said it was much better than the chicken and sausage that Salazar had been pulling apart for her. Hedwig, however, eyed the bowl hungrily, and before Salazar knew it, Hedwig had used her wing to knock Nora away from the bowl. Then she snatched up one of the mice and began circling above their heads. You stupid pigeon! You stole my breakfast! Give me back my breakfast! Nora yelled, as she raised her head up. She started trying to attack Hedwig, but the owl made sure to stay out of her striking range. Hedwig began teasing Nora though, by hovering above them and swooping down low every so often. Listen here, you haughty feather duster! Nora yelled, as she continued to try and reach Hedwig. You won't like what I do to you, if you don't give me back my breakfast. Salazar just shook his head and laughed at their antics, but Hedwig suddenly dropped the mouse, which landed on Nora's head. Then it rolled off the table and onto the floor. Then she swooped down low, and appeared to try and grab another mouse out of the bowl, but Nora suddenly launched herself off the table and somehow managed to wrap herself around Hedwig's foot. This did not go over well with Hedwig, who immediately began trying to shake her off. By this time the entire Great Hall was watching them, and Salazar was laughing too hard to do anything about it. Hedwig managed to shake Nora off her foot and the snake landed on the floor, and quickly slithered over to the mouse, but Hedwig cut her off. The owl used her wing and batted the mouse further away from Nora, who stopped and glared at the bird as she landed several feet away from her. Most of the professors were laughing, some looked curious as to who would win, and others looked on disapprovingly at the showdown. And it was a showdown. The mouse now lay between Nora and Hedwig, and both were staring at the other. Hedwig looked slightly ruffled, and Nora was hissing loudly. Try for it, pigeon, I dare you. It is my breakfast and you can't have it, Nora said, and Hedwig hooted at her and flapped her wings. Why can't you both share? Salazar asked, as he tried to regain control of himself. There is plenty of mice. That is not the point, speaker. The pigeon is a vicious, savage animal, because she stole my breakfast. Salazar snorted, and really didn't know what to say, but the two animals continued to stare at each other. Suddenly Hedwig took flight and tried to grab the mouse again, but this time Nora launched herself towards her and managed to wrap herself around one of Hedwig's wings and body. Unable to fly now, Hedwig landed with a thump on the floor and laid there with her eyes closed. Salazar raised an eyebrow and began to wonder what Hedwig was doing, but Nora raised her head up and slithered out from under Hedwig. Then she peered closer at the owl, who was still just lying there. Pigeon? 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 Nora yelled as loudly as she could, then she took her tail and began thumping Hedwig on the chest. Pigeon, wake up. Speaker, I killed Pigeon. What do we do? Pigeon? Salazar was trying to keep a straight face, but Nora was so frantic and worried about Hedwig that it was hard to do so. Nora again peered into Hedwig's face and kept shouting at her, but suddenly Hedwig hooted loudly, which scared Nora, and she slithered backwards quickly. Hedwig jumped up, snatched up the mouse, and flew out of the great hall. Salazar and several other people started laughing, and it took a moment for what happened to register with Nora, who began yelling again. "That stupid pigeon tricked me. I thought she was dead, and she still stole my breakfast." "I'm sorry, my dear, but there are plenty of more mice. Would you like another one?" Salazar asked as Nora made her way back towards him. "No, speaker. I am full, but next time Pigeon won't be so lucky. I will bite her." Salazar chuckled softly and picked her up off the floor and sat her back on the table. She coiled around herself and began grumbling about feather dusters, stupid pigeons, and biting things. Salazar just chuckled again. Blaze, who had been one of the many people laughing the whole time, moved from where he was sitting and sat in front of Salazar. Nora lifted her head up and looked at him, but then laid it down. "Hello, Zabby. Perhaps you can get Speaker to stop laughing at me." Salazar snorted again, and looked at Blaze, but he was watching Nora carefully. "Is it okay if I sit here? Will she bite me?" Salazar shook his head. "No, as a matter of fact she greeted you, and said that maybe you can get me to stop laughing at her." "Really?" he asked in surprise, but then he chuckled. "I thought she didn't like anyone but Granger and Longbottom." "Oh no. There are several people that she doesn't mind. She likes Fred and George, Hermione and Neville, you, and several of the professors." "She bit Weasley though," Blaze said, still watching Nora warily. "Only because the carrot attacked Speaker," she said, and Blaze looked at Salazar questioningly. "She said she only bit Ron because he attacked me." "Oh. Can I pet her?" Salazar nodded, and Blaze reached out cautiously to pat Nora's head. They sat there in silence for a few minutes as the boy petted Nora, and finally he began to relax more and more. Nora seemed to not mind him, and actually nudged his hand when he quit petting her. Blaze smiled at her before turning to Salazar. "I never got a chance to thank you for last night. I stayed in the room so I could hopefully warn you before you laid down. They asked the 7th year to put the flagrate curse on your pillow," he whispered. "Draco actually did your nightstand drawer handle. He used a biting hex, but he must have placed it on my extra pair of shoes before I came in. I'm pretty sure that's what it was anyway," he mumbled. "I was wondering why you were sitting on your bed reading because you always stay in the common room if you're doing that. Draco and company, however, were the ones that tipped me off that something was wrong. Hanging around, snorting, and giggling like a bunch idiots, or should I say, Gryffindors," Salazar replied, as he took a sip of his pumpkin juice. Blaze snorted. "But you seem to be friends with Gryffindors more than anyone else." Salazar shrugged. "They are the only ones who aren't afraid of me. Truth be told, Hermione and Neville don't get on my nerves like the others do, and Fred and George are the same way. Fred and George like to laugh and play pranks, but honestly, who doesn't like to laugh? Besides, they aren't as brainless as the rest of their family." "I suppose that's true," Blaze said thoughtfully. "The Weasleys and the Longbottoms are purebloods, although they are considered blood traitors, but Granger is a mud." "If you say mudblood, I'll curse you," Salazar said sharply, as he glanced at the boy. Blaze reddened slightly. "Mulborn. That's better," he said with a smile. "Neville and Hermione like to learn, and I've realized that I like to teach. Even at the Mull primary school I attended before getting my letter, I would find myself helping those that needed or wanted it. I don't know why, but I can read and retain information better than most. I've always been like that though. Fred and George seem to like me only because I helped them with their mother's howlers, but that's fine too. I don't mind. You do seem to pick up things pretty fast, but I guess you're like Ravenclaw in that aspect. Most people say you can do the harder bits of magic because you're powerful, but I suppose you'd have to be, since you defeated you-know-who," Blaze said, but whispering the last part. Salazar just shrugged again, and placed his napkin down on the table. "Whether that is true or not, I can't say, but I do know that it is fun surprising people that I can do these things. He chuckled. I suppose I could have hid it, but really, what's the point in that? All it would do is hinder my studies. I suppose you're right, Blaze said with a smile. Blaze started to say something else, but suddenly a dark shadow loomed over them and they looked up to see Snape glaring down at them. Potter, if you are done providing the morning entertainment, the headmaster insists that we leave for Diagon Alley. I personally have better things to do in the alley, other than babysitting you. Be in my office in 10 minutes. He said, and turned on his heel and stalked away. Salazar sighed and rolled his eyes. I suppose I better go. He sure does hate you. He doesn't act like that with anyone else in the house, Blaze commented, as Salazar stood up. I don't know whether, he said with a shrug. But if I'm not back by lunch, send someone to check his potion ingredients cabinet. There might be bits of me in it. Blaze laughed as Salazar scooped up Nora, and after taking one last bite of his toast, he quickly followed the potions master out of the great hall. Snape walked briskly down the corridors with Salazar struggling to keep pace beside him, and it was at times like these that Salazar missed his normal tall form. Once they got into Snape's office, however, Salazar plopped down in a chair to catch his breath, and Snape turned to smirk at him. Sir, may I suggest an exercise routine? Some of the mole-raised and born often take to jogging around the lake. Salazar glared at him, but then grinned and sent a stinging jinx at the potions master, which was blocked with an easy flick of the young man's wand. Cheeky doesn't suit you, Severus? He laughed. You forget that I'm a pureblood, and we only run if we are being chased by the demons of hell itself. Snape chuckled. So I've noticed. Do you have any thoughts on why Albus wishes you to have 2 wands? Salazar threw his hands up in the air and scoffed with exasperation. No. He said simply, but then he sighed. The only thing I can think of is that he wishes me to have a light wand instead of a dark wand. I was truthful about its materials and buying it in Nocturne Alley, and I mainly did that to rattle him. I didn't, however, expect him to act so idiotic about it. Snape rolled his eyes. Well, you are the savior of the wizarding world, the boy who lived, and other various names. We can't have you running around with a dark wand now, can we? Salazar chuckled. What did I say about being cheeky? Snape smirked at him and pointed to the flue. Shall we? I suppose, Salazar said with a sigh. Salazar and Severus stepped out of the flue at the leaky cauldron, and basically went their separate ways from there. Snape had to make a trip to the apothecary for some potions ingredients. Apparently some of the younger years had already ruined enough ingredients and blown up enough cauldrons to warrant a trip. Salazar, on the other hand, begrudgingly made his way towards Ollivander's wand shop. It wasn't busy at all, but there was an older lady who needed a replacement wand, so Salazar waited patiently for her to be sorted out. Salazar knew Ollivander, of course, from living in the alley for the past few centuries. He knew the man had a tendency to be creepy, as some of his customers put it, but he also knew the man was an excellent wand maker. He himself had owned several wands that had been made by the Ollivander family. Most recently, his last wand had been made by Ollivander's great-grandfather Gerbold. Though, he had purchased that one nearly 150 years ago. When the shop was clear, Ollivander turned to Harry and smiled brightly. Good morning, Mr. Potter. How are you today? I'm doing fine, sir. Professor Dumbledore sent me here because of my wand. Yes. Albus Floo called me this morning, and told me to expect your arrival. It's very curious that he wants you to have 2 wands, and I myself honestly don't know why. However, he did ask me to take a look at your yew and basilisk hide wand. Would you permit me? Of course, sir, Salazar said, handing him the wand that offended Albus so much. Ollivander took it, carefully rubbed his expert hands over it, and peered at the wand closely. Then he slightly tilted his head to the side and held it up as if to study it, before smiling at Salazar. This is a very powerful wand, Mr. Potter, and I sense that it is slightly dark, but I suspect that is because the core is made from basilisk hide. I don't know why Albus is all that worried about it though. It's expertly made and the wood and materials are of very high quality," he said, placing the wand up to his ear. "However, it is a very old wand. Nearly 80 years old to be precise." Salazar nodded. "Yes sir, that's what the man said when I bought it." Ollivander seemed to ponder this statement for a moment, then looked at him curiously. "How does it work for you?" "It works really well. I can get most spells on the first few tries with it, and when I first touched it, I felt all tingly, but in a good way," Salazar said with a smile, shaking his body as if to demonstrate the tingly feeling. Ollivander smiled and nodded as he handed Salazar the wand back. "Well, I suppose we better get you situated with another wand, though I don't really understand why," he said, as he began pulling boxes of wands off the shelf. An hour later saw a shocked Ollivander telling Salazar all about the holly and phoenix feather wand that had just bonded to him. Apparently, Ollivander had sold the yew and phoenix feather wand that had given Salazar the lightning bolt-shaped scar on his forehead, and the old wand maker said that his and Voldemort's wand cause came from the same phoenix. Salazar grew more and more angry with each word, but he held his temper and anger in check until he could exit the shop. After paying and thanking Ollivander for his help, Salazar ducked into a small alcove so he could apparat into his flat, where he promptly began blowing up his furniture. After letting out a cry of disgust and anger, he glared out of his charmed windows down into the alley below. "How has Albus managed this?" Salazar thought, as he watched a few young children run about in the alley. "How did he manipulate this?" Ollivander looked genuinely shocked. "So I know he wasn't a part of it, but how? Damn you, Albus." He briefly thought about repairing his furniture just so he could blow it all up again, but he spotted Severus ducking into Ollivander's and ducking back out a few moments later. Then he saw the young man look around, before heading over to Flourish and Blots. What was it that Ollivander said? "The wand chooses wizard?" That's what his forefathers always said as well. He suddenly had an idea and checked his little alcove spot, before operating back into the alley. He entered Flourish and Blots and spotted Severus right away, but gave the man a "we need to talk later" look before heading up towards the checkout counter. Salazar took a deep calming breath and then smiled at the clerk. "Excuse me, sir? Can you tell me where I might find books about wand lore?" Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Severus raise a questioning eyebrow as the clerk pointed to a dusty section in the back of the store. Both men quickly retreated to the section, and Salazar began scanning the titles on the spines. Every once in a while he would pluck a book off the shelf, scan the contents, and either put it back or place it aside. Severus watched him, but didn't say anything until they had left the bookshop and were heading back to the Leaky Cauldron. "Sir?" he whispered quietly and a bit curiously, as they entered the ancient pub. "Not here, Severus," Salazar whispered back as they reached the flue. "Most certainly not here." Albus looked around the room with a happy smile. He had gotten a flue call from a very stunned Ollivander just after Harry had left his shop, and the old wand maker told him the whole story. He had a feeling that this would happen, and he was glad that he suggested to Harry to get another wand. To Albus, this new set of circumstances pushed aside any doubt that the prophecy was false. He now knew that it was 100% true. Harry Potter is the one that will defeat Voldemort. He was shaken out of his thoughts when the door to the staff lounge opened and his potions master walked in, looking grouchy as usual. "At least he doesn't look angry," he thought, as the man took his usual seat. Albus smiled around at everyone. "Thank you all for being here a little later than normal, and I'm sorry that your Saturday afternoon is taken up by our meeting. Before we dive into our usual business, I wish to inquire about young Harry. Severus, were there any problems this morning?" "None," Snape said in a bored tone. "However, the brat can't listen to what he is told to do. I told him to go to Ollivander's and stay there after he got his wand, while I went to the apothecary. He, just like his father, doesn't listen and I had to track him down. I finally found him in Flourish and Blots. Did he buy anything? Albus asked, suddenly alarmed. Just some old books about children's tales and such. That is what his reading level is, I believe. The boy can't even get anything worthwhile, he said, telling Albus what Salazar had asked him to. Several people looked at him with disapproval because of what he said, but Minerva and Poppy glanced at each other. Are you sure of that? Albus asked, looking unconvinced. After his display of using blood magic last night, yes. I made sure, Severus said, rolling his eyes. Several people gasped, and Albus gave him a stern glare. Albus, is that true? Professor Sprout asked, as her hand flew to her mouth. Albus sighed, and nodded. Yes, he used what he calls a blood magic protection ward. He used a piece of parchment sprinkled with his blood. The ward glows yellow and he claims it protects the caster from harm while inside it. It also shows anything that has been cursed within its perimeters. It is a LL legitimate ward, and he cast it PP properly. Quirrell said, and several people glanced at him. I am very impressed, and it works because there's several items turn the PP proper blood red. Several Slytherins cursed his tea things. Quirrell is correct. The ward he cast is also protecting Mr. Zarbini, whose things were also cursed. Severus confirmed. I looked into it last night, and Potter did indeed cast the ward correctly and it does what he claims. It is a very simple ward to do, and any first year with enough control over their magic can accomplish it, so I'm not surprised Potter could. Even if he is a dunderhead. Other students cursed his things? Flitwick asked in shock. Albus sighed. Yes, his dorm mates. I think the others put a flagrate charm on his pillow, Snape said, and everyone's eyes widened in shock. Well, I never thought I'd say this about dark magic, but good on Mr. Potter for protecting himself and others. Minerva said with a nod. I hope you weren't too hard on him, Severus. He was obviously displaying what do Slytherins call it? Oh yes, self-preservation. Snape sneered at her, but Albus sighed again. I took points from Slytherin and gave all the boys detention. All of them? Minerva asked, and Albus nodded. But why Mr. Potter? Flitwick asked. Because he used dark magic. Albus said sharply. But Albus, you can't punish the boy for protecting. Minerva started to say, but she was cut off. It's done, Minerva, he said impatiently. It's dark magic no matter how you look at it. He bought the book in Nocturne Alley, along with his wand. It's a dark wand, and is made from yew and basilisk hide. That is why I sent him to Ollivander this morning. He now has a proper wand. Ollivander tells me it's made from holly and phoenix feather. Yes, and apparently it's the brother wand to the Dark Lords. Severus said suddenly, which made everyone at the table gasp in horror. He was spouting off about in the middle of Diagon Alley. I had to tell the stupid boy to remain quiet about it. So much for self-preservation, he said with a sneer. Albus scowled at the potions master and sighed again. That was not something he wanted to be known, especially in present company. Quirrell looked startled and stared from Albus to Severus, then back to Albus. Interesting that the boy W who defeated you know who W would have a brother wand. W, what does that mean exactly? I don't know, but Ollivander tells me that both feathers came from Fawkes. Albus said, then he decided to change the subject. How has Harry been performing in class? Is he still doing well? The change of topic worked and everyone started to talk about how good he was still doing in their classes. However, there were two certain witches that would be cornering Severus after the meeting. It worked for the witches, and Severus filled them in on what was really going on. He told them that Salazar believed that Albus somehow manipulated this, and bought a few books about wands and wand lore to better figure it all out. It was Sunday night, just after midnight, and Salazar was in his animagus form laying in the grass just several yards away from the front door of the school. Nora was back in the dorms, just in case one of the other boys woke up and discovered him missing. She would let him know what they did and if they told anyone. He lifted his head slightly when the doors opened and the heat signature of a cat walked out. It stopped on the bottom step, and cocked its ears in Salazar's direction when he hissed loudly. Then it turned towards him, silently padded over to him, and sat down. The two continued to watch the door, and it opened again a few minutes later. Then a heat signature of a person walked out. This time when Salazar hissed, the cat meowed loudly and the invisible person quickly made their way to them. After another minute or so, the process was repeated again as another person joined them. As soon as they were all together, they set off towards the meeting spot to meet with Nicholas and Perinel. The two disillusioned humans followed the animals into the forbidden forest, and after a few minutes of walking, they came upon a spot that was flat and devoid of any trees and bushes. Soft grass covered the area, and Salazar saw the heat signature of two more people. He nodded his head, and returned to human form. "Did you have any problems finding this place, Nicholas?" Nicholas chuckled as he and Perinel cancelled their charms. "We can't hide from you, can we, Salazar?" "No, I suppose not," he said, giving him a friendly hug. "Perinel, you look lovely as always," he said, bowing slightly and kissing her hand. She smiled. "Salazar, you're always such a charmer, and trying to flatter me." "Yes, well, you always refuse my offers for marriage, though I can't understand why, so I keep trying." "Who else would keep this balmy old fool in line if I did?" she teased. Nicholas laughed. "You've been trying to steal her away for 500 years. It must be something in the Slytherin line that won't let you give up." "It's called determination," Salazar said with a grin, and Nicholas chuckled. "My old friends, I'd like to introduce you to my new friends. This is Minerva McGonagall, head of Gryffindor, Severus Snape, head of Slytherin, and Poppy Pomfrey, our resident healer." Minerva, Poppy, and Severus bowed their heads slightly out of respect, but Perinel smiled brightly. "I'm so glad that there are two competent witches that are able to keep Salazar in line and out of trouble, but watch out for him. He may look like a cute 11-year-old boy, but he's a devil with a silver tongue, and he needs your guidance," she said with a grin, and everyone laughed as Salazar started grumbling, but then Perinel looked at Severus and smiled. "As for you, young man, you also need to keep him in line, lest he starts to overthink things and causes problems. Salazar's been known to do that." Severus, Poppy, and Minerva chuckled, but Salazar raised his head up and grinned. "I'll have you know, woman, that I am Salazar Slytherin, and I am perfect. Stop telling them anything otherwise." "See what I mean?" she said with a laugh. "I tell you this, my friend, it's good to have you back," Nicholas said with a laugh. "But on to what we are here for. Details." "Yes," Perinel said with a nod. "Salazar, please tell me you were overreacting about the children being eaten. This has greatly disturbed me." "I wish I was," he said with a sigh. He went on to explain all that was happening, and with every new detail, the Flamels grew more and more angry. They were outraged about the fact that Salazar thinks that Albus used the stone to lure Voldemort out into the open. Perinel was especially angry over the idea that Dumbledore would be so cavalier with hers and Nicholas's lives, and place a, seemingly, child in this much danger. If Voldemort somehow managed to get the stone, they would die. Salazar went on to explain the door, Cerberus, and Griffin, and Minerva told them about the other traps. Nicholas, if it was possible, was even more angry about that. A troll, chess set, devil's snare, potions riddle, flying keys, and an animal were not his idea of protections. Strong spells, enchantments, and wards were. He did not fault Minerva and Severus in this, because it was revealed by Minerva that Albus had told them to use their area of expertise. He said that protecting the stone was Albus's job, not theirs. Needless to say, by the time they were done talking, the Flamels wanted to march up to the school and demand their stone back, but Salazar told them that they would have it soon. Minerva said that the stone would be in place by Halloween, which was on Thursday. This eased their minds greatly. There was several minutes of silence as everyone was lost in their own thoughts, but then Salazar sighed, and looked at Nicholas. "I hate to ask something of you, but I need your help in another matter." "What is it, Salazar?" Nicholas asked curiously. "I got a letter some time back from Lily and James Potter. James is adamant that Sirius Black couldn't have killed the moles. He said that is not something he would do, even in a moment of grief. Would you be able to ask some of your contacts in the ministry to give you a copy of the trial transcripts? I want to read about what happened, and what was said during the trial." "I can do that. You've done so much for us, so of course." "Thank you." James did say that it was possible that Sirius Black killed Peter Pettigrew, but not the moles. "Peter Pettigrew?" Two identical voices cried out from behind one of the very large trees that bordered the clearing. All the adults turned around with their wands raised.
Hey guys, what's going on? Thank you so much for watching today's episode. If you guys want to watch more like it, please subscribe to my channel and become part of the video game fanfiction plot. And please leave a comment down below and hit that like button. If you guys have any suggestions on any stories you guys want me to read, don't hesitate. They're always welcome here in the video game fanfic plot. That also goes for video games. Until next time, goodbye!